Here we go now, baby. Welcome to another edition of Pound for Pound Picks. This time, the UFC Saudi Arabia edition of the show. We are proudly presented by Bet99, so make sure you check them out for all your UFC betting needs. We say hello to my partner, Ro. As you can probably tell, different location for us here. We are at a company retreat, different rooms here. Ro, did you make that bed behind you? It's hard to tell here from my vantage point.
Well, I've got two beds in here, so we can talk about that later when we get into Conor McGregor and what happened to that fight. But I got a pretty nice room that they moved me into right by the entrance, so I got a couple of beds. One I haven't even touched yet.
That's okay. Living the luxurious life. Okay, so fun looking card here. It was a funner looking card. We'll talk about that here after the picks. But for those of us in North America, going down on Saturday afternoon. I love these UFC events that are taking place at different times of the day. Okay, so let's start like we always do. The main event, we have Robert Whittaker coming in at minus 150, taking on replacement fighter Ikram Aliskerov, who comes back at plus 130. And no doubt about it, I am all over the former champion Robert Whittaker here. If this line's a trap, I'm fully prepared to fall into it because I think that this is a beautiful number on Robert Whittaker. He's one of the best fighters in the UFC over the past couple of years who doesn't have a belt around his waist. He typically only loses to the best of the best in this weight class. And no exaggeration, I think that this is one of the biggest step ups in competition in the history of the UFC here for Aliskerov. He has 3 fights under the UFC banner, 1 on Dana White Contender Series, and 2 within the UFC. None of the opponents that he has faced have a winning record in the UFC. Then you got to factor in the fight situation for him. As I said, this is a short notice fight, about a week and a half. He was preparing to fight in Las Vegas last Saturday. Now he's flying to a completely different part of the world to fight at a completely different time of the day, going up against one of the best fighters in the division. So I think Robert Whittaker is being severely undervalued here, minus 150. Aliskerov's going to come at him hard in the first round. If he can pull off the upset, it will likely happen then. But I don't see it happening. Robert Whittaker's fought so many different styles of opponents. He's a very high IQ type of guy in there. So I like him to get the W here, minus 150 over at Bet99. Ro, how are you betting on the main event?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the same train as you, a little bit different in terms of my exact bet, but I completely agree with you. This is a huge step up in competition for Ikram. And I mean, you mentioned the fighters, but I'm going to go in a little bit more depth on them. So Contender Series, he knocks out Mario Souza in the first round. Souza is not a UFC caliber fighter. His only other Contender Series fight, he ended up getting dominated by Chidi Njokuanu. So, I mean, this is a guy who's not UFC caliber. His UFC debut is against No Chin Phil Hawes, who's been knocked out in the first round in 4 of his last 5 fights. And he's coming off the win against Warley Alves, who is 2-6 in his last 8, with 4 of those losses coming inside the distance. Now you're going up against Robert Whittaker, a guy who's been fighting against the best of the best in this division for the last decade. You look at his last 10 years, 14-3. His only losses coming to former champ Israel Adesanya and current champ Dricus du Plessis. So, I mean, it's a pretty weird one. And then, I mean, both these guys, yeah, it is a bit of a matchup switch around over the last week. But it's comparing apples to oranges here. Whittaker was expected to fight Khamzat Chimaev, who's one of the most dangerous guys in the division, really high-end elite wrestling, a lot of power. So he's been preparing for, a very dangerous fighter. Whereas Aliskerov was a minus 1,300 favorite last week against Antonio Tricoli, who's an absolute scrub, who doesn't deserve to be in the UFC, has never really fought in the UFC, and hasn't even fought at all in like 3 years, and used to fight at light heavyweight. So, I mean, he was a massive, massive favorite in Vegas, and all of a sudden he's flying across the world to fight a completely different style of fighter. And now he's supposed to be going 5 rounds. And I think that could make a big difference in this one because he's never fought more than 3 rounds. His last 3 fights have all been in the first round. He's won. And now he's going up against a guy in Whittaker who is really good cardio and is able to wear guys down as long as he avoids that early power. And you look at last 7 wins for Whittaker coming by decision. Whittaker by decision in this spot, plus 265. So some crazy value there. So I like Whittaker. I like him on the money line, but I'm also going to put some money on him to win by decision at big money there.
Yeah, Whittaker, he's gone to decision 8 of his last 10 fights, a lot of those 5-rounders, so he is a bit of a decision machine. Okay, so we go down to the co-main event. I don't have a bet for this one, but a kind of a fun-looking heavyweight fight here. Pavlovich taking on Volkov. Volkov, a bit of a gatekeeper to the top 5 in the division, in my opinion. Ro, you're placing a bet on this fight. What do you like?
Yeah, I mean, keeping it simple, Pavlovich by knockout. You look at Volkov, and I mean, like you said, he's a gatekeeper. He's a good fighter, good kickboxing, does a good job of keeping things at range with his, his reach advantage. But the thing is, he tends to lose that against guys that are really elite at kind of any one skill. And Pavlovich is one of the hardest hitters in the division. Pavlovich also has an insane reach, especially for his height. The guy's 6'3", but I think his reach is like 84 inches. So one of the biggest ape indexes in the UFC. And he hits so hard, a lot of times guys think they're out of his range. And then he manages to connect with them. And then they're all of a sudden on the back foot and getting wobbled and just getting starched. So it's a really tough matchup for him. One interesting thing about this fight is that these guys have been sparring partners before. So they have been in the octagon before. I am seeing that kind of permeate the MMA community online. This idea that because they're sparring partners, that because they're friends, they might end up going the distance. It's pretty big plus money, but I don't think so. Pavlovich has also gone on the record as saying, Volkov has gone on the record as saying that Pavlovich just wrecks him in every sparring session too. I'm not sure if he's just being complimentary or not, but I think from a physical attribute standpoint, I think Pavlovich's power is going to be too much. Yes, he got knocked out by Aspinall in the first round, but Aspinall might be the best heavyweight in the world. And if you look at all his fights before that, he was just starching guys early. And I think this fight isn't going to go 15 minutes. I think Pavlovich is going to be able to put him away.
Okay, let's drop down. I think this one's on the main card. One of the scariest looking motherfuckers on the roster, Shara Magomedov, taking on Yoltan Luterbach. I'm going to take this fight not to go the distance. That one's going off at even money plus 100. So quite simply, two very aggressive guys getting after it here. Great matchmaking by the UFC. Each of these guys will be looking to get a finish. You take a look at Magomedov, 10 KOs in 12 professional fights. In his career, 7 of those wins have come in the first round, so he doesn't typically spend a lot of time in the cage. Luterbach is a guy, he's seen 8 of his last 11 fights get finished inside the distance. A little bit of trivia for you guys. The second time we'll be mentioning this guy's name on the show. He got knocked out by Dricus du Plessis back in 2019. So I think that's going to be an entertaining fight. I think someone is going to get finished, most likely Luterbach. But maybe it could surprise people with the submission. I don't think that's going to happen, but if he wins, that's the only way I think he could pull that off. Okay, Ro, let's go down to the prelims. We each have one bet for the prelim portion of the card. What do you got?
Yeah, looking at the lightweight division, looking at Nasrat Haqparast taking on Jared Gordon. This is one where I think Haqparast is a little bit of an underrated fighter. He hasn't always come away with these dominant, knockouts or submissions. So he doesn't finish a lot of guys, but he looks pretty good in his fights. And a lot of times he fights guys that are looking pretty sharp as well. But big takeaway for me in this fight is like Haqparast is like minus 250. I don't think there's any value on the money line, but I do think there's value on backing him to win by decision at plus 120. Now, both these guys are coming off knockout wins, but it was against guys that have terrible durability. You look at their previous fights. You look at Haqparast's previous 6 fights before he knocked out Jamie Mularkey. All 6 of those had gone the distance. Gordon's coming off a knockout win against Mark Madsen, but you look at his previous 6 fights, 5 of those had gone the full 15 minutes as well. So very good chance this guy goes the distance. If you're looking at building a parlay for this fight night event, would definitely say this to go the distance would be a nice one to keep in mind. And once it goes the distance, I think Haqparast's a little bit of a cleaner striker, a bit of better boxer, and his grappling's pretty good as well. So I think he gets the decision win here. And you can get a decision win for Haqparast at about plus 120 right now.
Okay, last pick for me for the UFC Saudi Arabia card. Fakhretdinov, he's fighting Nicholas Dalby. And there's a couple different ways you can bet this fight. So neither of these guys has ever been finished. And, if you watch our show, I like these patterns and these trends that I see. So you can take the fight not to go the distance, or the fight to go the distance at minus 175. But I actually like Fakhretdinov to get the W here, and I think he's going to win by decision, so I'm going to take him -120. This is a guy who hasn't lost an MMA fight since 2013. That was his second career mixed martial arts pro fight. Very nice striking differential for him, about +2 per minute. And in the UFC, he's had 3 fights, and he's averaging 4.25 takedowns per 15 minutes in the cage. And I do think that is his path to victory. I think he's going to be able to get Dalby on his back, have a lot of top control that's going to chew up a lot of clock. 3 of his 4 fights, I should say, in the UFC have gone the distance. I think that's going to be the case here, and he gets his hand raised to win by decision here. Okay, Ro, so I think this time last week, the main event here looked a lot different on this card. Khamzat Chimaev, we were looking forward to him finally testing himself against a true 185er. We know he took on Kamaru Usman on about a week and a half's notice, but Usman is a true 170-pounder. And this is a movie we've seen before with Khamzat Chimaev. He's pulled out of high-profile fights in the past. You know, we've seen him miss weight before. And this is a guy who seemed to have all the potential in the world once upon a time, but he never fights anymore. He's not showing up to work. So ultimately, I don't think this is a guy who's going to live up to his potential, being a UFC champion. The 2 times he's been tested in there against good fighters, Gilbert Burns and Usman, we saw him fade quite a bit in those fights. So, yeah, very talented guy, but I don't think it's going to happen for him. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm on board with you there. I mean, it's kind of crazy to consider that, when this guy's star was flying high, he had 3 wins in a 3-month period in the UFC. And since then, he's only fought 3 times in 3 years. And, this is like someone that I think there is something like health-wise that is, really like concerning about him. We saw that due to over COVID, he said he had a really, really bad case of COVID, almost retired. We've seen some interesting, I don't want to say rumors, but interesting stories about how sick he is for this one, which would suggest that he is very, very sick, which isn't good for his long-term outlook as a fighter. And it's certainly not good for, depending on what his illness is, if it is, respiratory related, then, that's something that's going to make, cardio always an issue for him, especially when he fights these higher end fighters. So, I don't think he's ever, not necessarily going to capitalize on that potential that we saw when he entered the UFC and he was just ending guys within the first minute or so.
Okay, and of course, a much higher profile fighter also pulled out due to an injury. So we've been talking about this on the show the past couple of weeks. Conor McGregor, will he or won't he? It looked good, then it looked bad, then it looked good, and then it looked bad. It's not going to happen at UFC 303. I'm very bummed out because I'm headed down to Las Vegas, and I will be attending the card, and watching a Conor McGregor fight in person is on my sports bucket list. And here's the thing, I don't know if I'm ever going to get the chance to. I would put the odds at +200 that this fight with Michael Chandler actually happens. Now, they're coming out and saying that McGregor wants to push it to later in the summer, in the fall. Michael Chandler's going to wait, apparently. And there's 2 ways of looking at that. I think it's easy to criticize Chandler for wanting to wait because it's taken forever to actually make this fight. Now it's getting delayed again. And Eddie Alvarez kind of said something smart. I saw him on a program the other day, and he said, when you're in the later stages of your career, you want to fight as less as possible for as much money as possible. And that would be exactly the case if they can actually make this fight. But apparently it is an injury. They're not saying what it is. I saw something, Big John McCarthy, the former referee, I think it was, said that it is that repaired leg that is acting up for McGregor. And if that is the case, it's been 3 years since he had that injury. Now, I don't know if it is the case, but if it is, I don't know if we're ever going to see him fight in MMA again. Maybe he can go and do a couple boxing matches or something like that, but it is a complete and total bummer. Decent replacement fight for sure in the main event. But, Ro, what's your take on the whole thing with McGregor, his future, and Chandler wanting to wait for the fight?
I'm going to preface this by saying I totally understand this sort of thing happens. I'm pushing, a couple of years away from 40 myself. And as you know, I just recently tore my Achilles tendon playing a non-contact sport. So I definitely feel for McGregor. This sort of thing happens, especially when you're a professional athlete playing combat sport or fighting in a combat sport at the highest level. At the same time, a bit disappointed in the UFC for kind of putting all their eggs in one basket. I understand where Chandler's coming from, because at this point you've invested almost 2 years into this big money fight with McGregor. And so I'm sure he doesn't want to, all of a sudden, change gears, move on to another matchup, and then see someone else fight McGregor for, big boatload of cash in, 6 months time or something like that. So I understand why he might want to stick with it as well. I've always been a little bit cynical about ever seeing McGregor anywhere near being a high-end fighter again in the UFC. And I think that's going to kind of stay with me. He's still such a huge draw, though. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if even like 1 or 2 years down the line, he ends up coming back and fighting in just like a weird MMA fight against Tony, and just like someone like that, and just like takes on a fun fight, maybe even Diaz again, right? Like something like that. I could see that happening down the line. But as far as ever fighting at really a high level, I don't think that's really in his back pocket anymore. I think it's that's part of the reason I think he's been focusing on all these other things, his whiskey, his movies, career, that sort of thing, because it's hard. It's hard to get back into it, and it's hard to get healthy once you suffer a really bad injury like that.
Yeah, if it is that leg that's acting up, I don't know if we're going to see him in the octagon again, but maybe, Nate Diaz is fighting Jorge Masvidal. Maybe if that does a good number on pay-per-view, McGregor takes a look at that and says, hey, UFC, let's kind of go in and promote something here and have a little bit of fun with that. So we shall see. But yeah, we will be on to the new UFC 303 when we are with you guys next week. Looking forward to breaking that one down. A lot of pretty good betting angles on that card. I might say Brian Ortega was a little undervalued when that first came out, but that line's on the move a little bit, I do believe. Okay, so we will discuss that one next week. But we thank Ro for joining us. Dear viewer, we thank you for watching. Best of luck with all your bets. Make sure you head on over to Bet99 for all your UFC betting needs. We will see you guys next week.